Welcome to Lift History. This is a muscle power magazine featuring the iconic bodybuilder and actor Steve Reeves. But it's not Steve Reeves that this episode of Lift History is all about, even though he was most muscular man of 1947. It's actually an article in here that is Louis Cyr's last match. I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from this article about Louis Cyr's last match. And if you're unaware, Louis Cyr is one of the greatest old-time strongmen of all time. He's from Canada, and he was known for many lifts, some of which being back lifts such as this one that's in the magazine, where he has, like a dozen men sitting on his back, thick-handled dumbbells, like the one that I saw at the York Barbell Museum, if you've seen that video of mine on my YouTube. And this true story, it says, of Louis Cyr's last competition comes from author Martin Franklin. And this was published, as I said, in Muscle Power, October issue of 1947. The long-heralded, headline-making Cyr Dakari weightlifting match. And by the way, I'm doing my best to pronounce his opponent's name, Dakari. We'll roll with that. Forgive me if I'm incorrect. It was at last to take place, and the surging crowds that jammed Montreal's Salmer Park on that evening of February 27th, 1906 were tense with expectation, for they were to see the two unrivaled lions of strength, Louis Cyr and Hector Dakari, competing against one another. Now, this was a time way before World's Strongest Man and way before any kind of competition to definitively determine the world's strongest man. However, you had exhibitions like this where someone has retained a title as the world's strongest man, declared it, and said, hey, if you're going to challenge me, you're going to challenge me. So this is Louis's last of those expeditions. Exhibition, I should say, not expedition. In any case, the prize at stake, excluding side bets of several $1,000s, was the title of the strongest man in the world, an honor officially held for over 15 years by Louis Cyr. So Louis Cyr, claimed this title for over 15 years, but the turn of the century, there were several other strongmen claiming this title as well. So take that with a grain of salt. Dakari, the hopeful young challenger, was determined to wrest the crown from his teacher, friend, and compatriot. Hundreds of persons had arrived at the entrance doors hours ahead of time in order to be first in line to secure the best of the several thousand unreserved seats. The crowd was hotly divided as to which of the two French Canadians was going to be victor. It was a case of the youthful strength and endurance of a 190-pound Dakari versus the experience and once phenomenal might of the giant 315-pound Cyr. However, all seemed to agree that this was to be the old veteran's last appearance in the competitive weightlifting arena. Years ago, I discovered that my weights really didn't weigh what I thought they weighed, and that was problematic. Vintage gains are basically a do-it-yourself calibration kit. You can take just about any weight plate, weigh it, and then dial it in with Vintage Gains. From Micro Gains and Vintage Weights PGH. You can't convince me, Jacques, that our Louis Cyr is too old and sick to properly defend his championship title. Why, it wasn't so many years back that Cyr astounded the world with such record lifts as a one-arm press of 325 pounds, a back lift of 4,337 pounds, and a military press of 301 pounds. I don't say that Louis is as strong as in his former days, but I'm certain he has enough force left in his 20-inch arms to outdo that boy, Dakari. Why, just look at the measurements of the two men, recorded in today's La Presse, which I have here. Now, that's a quote that was put in the article from someone that the author said, was overheard, if you will, a conversation taking place between these two gentlemen, Jacques and Pierre. And it lists, I'm not going to read off all the measurements here that it lists. However, it's pretty clear that the weight is the biggest difference, 315 pounds to 191 pounds. So then it goes on to detail what happens, because it says such conversations were many as the impatient and excited crowd waited for the inner entrance to open. When the doors were unlocked, a veritable army of rushing men precipitated into the huge hall, each seeking out the best of the general admission seats. On the stage and in plain sight lay the ponderously heavy dumbbells and barbells, those belonging to Sear on the right side, Dakaris on the left. Incidentally, the author has examined and handled all of these weights. There was an electric buzzing that ran through the audience. Mon Dieu, regardez les gros haltères. The hall was quickly filling up, and by 8:30, all the seats were occupied, both on the ground floor and balcony. Latecomers were soon occupying the standing room only. In the box seats, one saw many St. James Street financiers. That's Montreal's Wall Street. Prominent judges and lawyers, doctors, bishops and priests, deputies, politicians, and other civic figures. As a group, the audience was a representable cross-section of French Canada, with but a sprinkling of English-speaking enthusiasts. I love in the article that the author points out contextual and regional things like this, that mostly it's a French-speaking audience, and within this theater, which, by the way, that's where most old-time strongmen would compete, in this theater atmosphere. So they'd be on stage against each other. And there's the general admission, but then you've got the higher paying tickets with the higher class, if you will, of citizens that are also in attendance. So you've got every walk of life coming out to see this battle. It made one quiver with pride to hear the thunderous 5-minute sustained applause and bravos that greeted the two peerless French-Canadian strongmen as they made their appearance on the stage. It was the patriotic and sympathetic acclamation of a warm and friendly people for their two champions. Fervent cries of Louis and Hector resounded off the walls of the vast auditorium. After their frantic welcome had subsided, both strongmen were formally presented to the public. From Saint Jean de Matha, Louis Cyr, l'homme le plus fort du monde, that's strongest man in the world. The victor over such renowned athletes is David Michaud, former champion of Canada, Otto Ronaldo, champion of Germany, Sebastian Miller, Eugene Sandow, champion of Great Britain, Cyclops, champion of Poland, Montgomery, and Johnson, champion of Scandinavia. So this entrance speaks to what I was saying earlier in the episode, how although there's no official competition like World's Strongest Man, it's almost like, if you've declared yourself World's Strongest Man, you got to go around and beat everyone, and everyone can challenge you to the title, even though there's no governing body or organization granting or, sanctioning such a thing. So then you'd list off all of these different people that you have defeated. From St. Henry, Montreal, the youthful challenger, Hector Dacary, who is the undisputed champion of Canada. An undefeated strongman who has triumphed over such stellar athletes as Ovray, the Belgian, Otto Ronaldo, Victor Delamare, and Rousseau. It occurred to me, poor Otto Ronaldo. He's listed in both the announcements as being defeated. So, I don't know if that got back to him or not at the time, but that kind of stinks for poor old Ronaldo. Cyr and Dacary then removed their robes to reveal amazingly developed physiques. The old champion's face was somewhat paunchy, and it was evident that he had lost much of the tremendous strength for which his name had long been held synonymous. However, he still possessed the largest muscular dimensions ever measured. His shoulders, which his rival Cyclops had admiringly pronounced the largest shoulders of all time, were wider than the average door and as broad as tabletops. Although his upper body was slightly flabby, beneath this fat lay iron coils of muscle. His waist was broad and square, his huge, roughly hewn legs hard as rock pillars. In a bird's eye view, he was a human colossus. Although Dacary was physically dwarfed by his opponent, one was immediately struck by the vigorous, clean lines of Hector's habitant frame, lines that told of an extraordinary force. His was a classical example of the French-Canadian physique, of medium height with very well-knit broad shoulders, a pair of 17-inch arms capable of performing unusual tasks and lifts, a strong, lithe waist, and heavily muscle-slabbed 26-inch thighs. After both had weighed in, Dakari scaling at 190 pounds and Cyr at 315, each took their places, Louis on the right, Hector on the left. So the terms of this competition, they were read out by a master of ceremonies. And, even though, like I said, no governing body was in charge, there was an agreed upon rules and terms by both contestants, if you will. So what would happen in this particular one was that each contestant was going to perform 4 of his own lifts. And if his opponent couldn't duplicate an exercise, it would count for a point in that person's favor. Almost like, playing horse on the basketball court, that kind of thing. So then the one who gains the highest number of points, performing a lift and then seeing if it can be duplicated, will be declared the winner and holder of the title, l'homme le plus fort du monde, strongest man in the world. Again, apologies if my French is not correct. I don't know how to speak French. The referee was announced and celebrated. 31-year-old athlete sports editor of that local publication, La Presse, Canada's largest French newspaper. And he was there to, act as the officiant, if you would. After all the weights had been officially weighed and marked, then both men came out of their corners smiling and shook hands. So this I find interesting too, because old-time strongmen get criticized constantly for cheating, for, having some kind of, fake weights or devious kind of things going on. And in the performance aspect of things, it's hard not to think that they wouldn't have some tricks up their sleeves when they're performing night after night after night. But in an exhibition like this, where the weights are being publicly weighed, there's shared weights between the two competitors, I think it sounds pretty legit. I mean, this sounds like, these guys are actually going to do this. So then, after all of them had been officially weighed and marked, both men came out of the corner smiling. Louis unexpectedly spoke out in a voice loud enough for all to hear. "Hector, you'd better give all you have, because I know that I will." At this remark, the audience applauded gleefully. That Cyr was far below what he had once been was soon to be made evident. As for Dakari, he had only been weightlifting for 6 years and had not yet reached his full development. The referee announced that Hector would do the right arm side press with heels together. From their seats in the second row of the general admission section, the gentleman that I had quoted earlier, they could see the barrel-chested Dakari bend down, grasp a very thick-handled short dumbbell weighing 135 pounds, clean it simply to his shoulder with both hands, and then with legs perfectly straight and heels touching, and with only the slightest side bend, ease the weight overhead. Cyr, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, told his seconds to load the bell up to 151 pounds. So when they're talking about his seconds, it's almost like a call back to medieval times when, the knight would have like the apprentice kind of working for him, that kind of thing. So the seconds are these, or also in a duel, you'd have your second in a duel with the weapon, assisting you, that kind of thing. So these seconds are loading up the barbell, and the veteran puts it aloft with ease in a style identical to Dakari's. But young Hector was not to give up so easily. The hollow dumbbell was loaded with shot till it tipped the scale at 171 pounds, and the challenger tried to do the same lift. But because he bent his legs as the weight went aloft, the judge pointed thumbs down. After he'd rested for 3 minutes, Dakari returned to the attack, and this time he was successful. Louis Cyr's seconds protested. Since Dakari had failed on his first attempt with it, the second try, which was successful, should count. But the ref made it clear that 3 attempts were allowed on each exercise, so the decision was in Hector's favor. Cyr, who in 1899 had one arm side pressed his famous 273-pound short dumbbell, declined to try the 171-pounder. So the point for the one arm side press went to Dakari. This stands out to me as being a strategic move, possibly. Or was he that fatigued, that weak by that point in his career? I'm thinking at this point in a match, probably the latter. But if your love for Louis Cyr abounds, then maybe the former. Maybe he was just being strategic. Hector's supporters went wild with excitement. It was the first time that the illustrious Louis Cyr had failed to duplicate an opponent's lift. Was this to happen on all of them? The immediate future would reveal the answer. So then the ref announced through his megaphone that Louis Cyr's first exercise would be the right hand short dumbbell snatch without any shifting of the legs and with straight arm. Bending at his 49-inch waist, Louis took hold of a 151 bell that lay between his legs and with one quick movement hurled the weight aloft. The author has handled this clumsy hollow weight. Hector's efforts at repeating the snatch were unsuccessful, and he conceded the point to the champion. Decarie had been unable to even get the unwieldy mass of iron started on the upward journey, and similar circumstances had befallen Henry Steinborn, the professional grappler who is often called the strongest man in wrestling. He tells us his experience with Cyr's 188.5-pound solid barbell, with which Louis established a record in the one-arm snatch. It's quoted that the handle was so thick and the weight so dead, I couldn't get it started, and I don't think anyone else can. So then Decarie goes on to lift his second lift, and he does so successfully. After that, Cyr comes up, and oh my gosh, although it seemed for a moment as though Cyr was going to fall over, he manages to repeat Decarie's lift. So now there's some hints going on here. He had declined to lift the 171 dumbbell. Now he's kind of stumbling. So next up was Louis' choice, and he chooses a 2-arm clean and press, and the giant proportioned Hercules brought the huge 2-inch diameter handled 288-pound solid barbell first to his shoulders without moving his legs, and then without touching any parts of the body, slowly but rather easily pushing the bar overhead. No other strongman living at that time could equal such a record, and today, if anyone were to attempt to duplicate this extraordinary feat using Cyr's bell, it would not be wrong to say that the effort would be unsuccessful, says the article. Decarie refused to contest such an amazing demonstration, so Cyr wins the second point. There was tremendous strength still in the old champion after all. The score was tied up, 2 points for Cyr, 2 for Decarie. The crowd begins to stir uneasily. Would this turn out to be a draw? So I like that the crowd doesn't want to draw. The crowd wants to see something happen here. So now, leading up to this, there'd been much fanfare, in the newspapers. It had been said about Hector's unusual ability in the bent press, which if you don't know what the bent press is, basically it's a one-handed lift where you're bending over almost like you're going to do a windmill in a way, but then you're bending at the waist while extending upward. So you can see a much better bent press if you follow strongman archaeology, or if you take a look at old-time strongman enthusiasts that do the bent press regularly. In any case, they're going to contest the bent press, and Hector, he puts up some pretty serious numbers. In 1912, he had accomplished 370 pounds prior to this, and using a giant hollow sphere dumbbell, one which the author again states that he has examined. I can't help but think the reason that the author keeps on saying that he's examined them, is for the purpose of trying to legitimize what took place this day. Because of what I said, there's even in the 1940s, there's some skepticism as to whether these old-time strongmen really were lifting the weights they claimed. In any case, so they saw the young dynamic titan performing with a 205-pound dumbbell. Cyr boosted this weight to 210, and after a terrible struggle midway up, he succeeded in completing the test. But Decarie was not to be outdone, and he filled the bell with lead shot till it scaled 220 pounds, they're doing for the bent press. After bringing the bell first to the waist, then to the shoulder, with one hand, he slowly pushed the weight up, at the same time bending way down and over to the side. Cyr, who had officially one-arm pressed 325 pounds in 1896 in Chicago, knew his present limits and so conceded the point. So once again, he concedes the point. The score is 3-3, and there was but one remaining lift, and it was to be the crucial acid test. If Sear won the point, the score would be tied and the issue undecided. If Dacary were able to equal or surpass Sear on the latter's own stunt, a new homme le plus fort du monde would reign. And I may have skipped a little something here that's important. Oh, look at that. Sorry about that, folks. I did skip, as I'm kind of jumping around to read little excerpts here. Dacary had scored a point because Louis tried desperately to repeat a 151-pound weight to his shoulder and press it 5 times in succession that Hector had done. But his 20-inch arms, once as hard as oak and now covered with a thick layer of fat, could only manage 4 repetitions. Oh, geez, Louis. So that's what put it at 4-3. So now it was on to these boxes of pig iron being placed on a 600-pound platform that lay on 2 4.5-foot high trestles. The total poundage, 2,879 pounds. After adjusting his highly ornate weightlifting belt, on which was written in gold letters the Latin word fortissimus, which means the strongest man, Sear placed his huge back under the platform. He put his hands on a small stool to gain leverage. The wood platform began to groan and squeak as the pressure forms underneath it, and it began to equal that of the load it supported. Slowly but perceptibly, one noticed the massive arms of Louis Sear straighten out as he pushed on the stool. The platform was rising. It was completely off the trestles. The Hercules supported the 1 1/3 ton load, which would now 1.5 inches off the trestles for 1 whole minute. Now it's Hector's turn to try to duplicate this. Somewhat pale, though with a grimly determined look on his face, Dacary made ready for the test. One can well imagine the thoughts that raced through the challenger's mind. If I can but equal Louis's lift, I'll be the champion of the world. So then, through gritted teeth, and exerting and straining till the veins knotted on his forehead, Dacary tried desperately to raise the ton of wood and iron, but the platform remained fast to its moorings. The young challenger tried again, his muscles knotted and writhing in folds, but to no avail. The last point was thus awarded to Sear, and the judge was forced to declare the match null, for both men had gained 4 points. But no sooner had the judge finished announcing the unsatisfactory results then Louis Sear stepped forward, and dominating the stage with his awesome frame, he declared, Hector Dacary is perhaps the strongest man I've ever met in all my years in the arena. It gives me deep pleasure to recognize him as my successor to the title of the strongest man in the world and my championship belt. I sincerely hope that he will respect and do justice to this, the highest honor that can be bestowed upon an athlete. Dacary, who had not the slightest idea that he was to be given this title, was almost overcome with emotion when he heard Sear's words. What a noble and unselfish thing it was for Louis Sear to do. Louis knew that this was to be his last competition, and that if he didn't give the crown to Dacary, every leading strongman in the world would proclaim himself the champion weightlifter, and the long, bitter struggle which Louis had endured to prove himself the real leader of strength would have to be undergone by Hector Dacary. Nor was Sear's decision to cede Dacary the award misjudged, for in 1920 in Montreal at the International Weightlifting Championship, Hector easily won top laurels in matches against the foremost weightlifters of America and every European country. Thus ended the brilliant and dazzling professional weightlifting career of Louis Sear. In his last remaining years, he was to perform phenomenal feats of strength. An article soon to appear in this magazine will discuss these exploits in detail, continuing our story of the career of this almost legendary strongman who will always rank as one of the true immortals in the history of human strength. I hope you've enjoyed this little sampling, and I don't have the other issues of Muscle Power that those articles appear in, nor do I plan to read them. I was just fascinated by this last competition of Louis Sear's. What do you think? Drop me a comment. Do you think it really happened just like that? Was this accurate reporting? Was it staged? Was there an agreement between Sear and Dacary that, it would come out a draw, but then Louis would cede the crown, if you will? Was it, even if not pre-planned, was it worked out in the moment? Did Louis come to this realization when he was ceding those points that oh man, my time has come? Let me know what you think. And at the very least, I hope you enjoyed this. I plan to do more of these where I just read a little excerpt from an old magazine or some type of thing that relates to strength history, because after all, this is lift history. And I am Rob from Vintage Weights PGH.
Thank you for watching Vintage Weights PGH. Please support the channel by purchasing apparel through the link in the description or at www.vintageweightspgh.com. Old weights, new gains, and lift history shirts are printed on high-quality next-level t-shirts, and they are available in multiple sizes and color options. Thank you for supporting the channel.